Okay. So I wanted to do a bit of a round of introductions, although I'm not going to go through the whole Smart Geo team because a lot of people here. But I'd like to welcome Joe Morrison of Umbra Space. Is it Umbra Space or just Umbra? Are we expected to know you by a single word name?
Just Umbra. It's like Pele, kind of similar. Like technically there's a last name. It's like technically it's Umbra Space, but we like to stylize it Umbra.
I like that. It's edgy.
Unfortunately, Umbra is also a furniture company with like 20 years of heritage on us. So the SEO is pretty brutal. So if you're gonna Google us, definitely add Umbra Space. But yeah.
Well, don't get me started on company names because that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down.
How did you pick Spark Geo?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I can't even remember that far back. But what I do know is that most people remember us as GeoSpark, which is like one of my personal frustrations. So anyway, that's going into my personal demons here. I don't want to derail this conversation we already have to some extent. But Joe Morrison, thank you very much for joining us from Umbra Space to talk about Sorry Not Sorry. You see what I did there? Clever. I'm going to keep on using that for a number of years to go.
You're actually the first person to ever do that. Well,
I don't know. I don't know how that's even possible. It seems so obvious to me. But I wanted to talk about a few things, in particular, your most recent Medium article. It's probably a good place to start, where you're talking about this notional sort of carving up of the Earth observation market. So I know you don't have any slides. We don't want any slides. We want more discussion. But I wanted to talk about how that Medium article, like where you've been in this space for quite a long time, and you identify in that article. It took you a while to get to this model, but yeah, let's just dive in. Like, what do you want to describe that model, and then we could sort of tease different parts of it apart?
Yeah, totally. I haven't thought about it much since I posted it, so it might be a little rusty. It's like every time I write one of those essays, I sort of put it down and I'm like, never going to read that again. That was, sometimes I do go back and read them. I always regret going back and reading them. That's always a mistake. You read them and you're like, ugh. But in general, the motivation for writing them is the prompt that I use is 6 months ago, what do I wish I would have known? Write an essay to myself 6 months ago. And those are usually the best essays. The dumb ones are the ones where I'm like writing to a generic audience or something like that. It's like, if I wouldn't have enjoyed reading it 6 months ago, then they always bomb. And most of the ones bomb that I enjoy. So it's a hits-driven business, if they say. But anyway, the last one, I hadn't published anything in like 6 months. I've been out of ideas for a lot longer than 6 months, but recycling the same ones over and over again takes energy. And this one actually was written as a different framework. It was mapping versus monitoring. I was trying to make the argument that there are only two use cases in the satellite imagery industry. You're either doing foundational geo mapping, roads, lakes, buildings, things that don't change much, and that you see when you flip on the map layer on Google Maps or Apple Maps, or you're doing monitoring. You're looking for change, and it's like black and white. And there are monitoring businesses and there are mapping businesses. The trouble was that like the model didn't work when actually put into practice. There was a lot of stuff where it's like, okay, they're not mapping, but it's short-lived. They're not monitoring either. It's just like a one-off image that they need right now, or they want like an image every day for a week, and then they don't care about that area. And I was like, that's monitoring, But then I'm like, but monitoring is also like planet scope. It's like a daily image of everywhere. It's not latent, monitoring is also Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-1 and Landsat. Like that's definitely monitoring.
Yeah.
So the blog post was about this third use case for satellite imagery, mobilizing. The hardest part was figuring out an M word for the concept, because mobilizing is a stupid word for it, but it's the least stupid word I could come up with. And it kind of makes sense.
Because I think about that as like situational awareness, like a picture of stuff so you know what's happening and you can respond to it in some manner.
Totally.
Is that fair comment?
It's event-driven. It's event-driven tasking.
Yeah. So from a like classic remote sensing perspective, it's military looking at what the baddies are doing. You know, what's happening? What do I need to do? You know, that kind of stuff.
It turns out, surprisingly to me, that like as soon as I realized there was a third circle to the Venn diagram, all of a sudden like a lot clicked into place, and a lot of like the weak arguments that I've been making suddenly felt really easy to make with a lot more conviction. And the irony of it is that mobilization is the most important use case for satellite imagery, and it's way more important than the others. Way more important.
It's like also the oldest one. Yeah, it's seeing what's happening and responding to it in a place.
Exactly, and it's the one that's historically only been accessible to defense and intelligence.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you can do your monitoring with the open data sets, the Landsats, the Sentinels coming up, the NISARs. Super excited about that. You can do your mapping with aerial surveys with the Google layer on the Google satellite imagery layer. Like, you're not allowed to. Don't tell anybody if you're doing mapping with it, but you can, know who's going to know. Or OpenStreetMap, that openly licensed satellite imagery layer, it's good enough for most mapping.
You can do a lot, yeah.
But I've quipped in the past that if you're ever desperately trying to buy satellite imagery, a satellite image, like you're already in a really bad place, like you're already pretty deep in it. And that's a reference to mobilization. If, where you live up in British Columbia, right? Isn't that where you are?
North of the wall. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So like death is, that's a reference to mobilization. If, where you live up in British Columbia, right? Isn't that where you are?
North of the wall. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So like death is, and you've evacuated, you really want that satellite imagery image to figure out if your home is still there. Like, you really need that. That's a mobilization. That is a where do I go? Where have things moved? And I used to think that's a monitoring use case. It's not.
But it's one off. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's different.
Yeah. So yeah, the really interesting thing that unlocks when you're trying to think about where do I fit in the satellite imagery industry is that those three buckets form a pretty neat non-linear price pressure function. Like, so I'll pay $10,000 for an image right now that was captured right now to find out if my home is still standing or not. That's what it's worth to me.
Yeah.
I'll pay, $1,000 for an image that's super high resolution that I can trace the exact property lines I can do a survey off of. But I'll only pay $100 for an image that is going to be captured sometime in the next week. And maybe I'll get that every single week. So at the high end, you have mobilization. In the middle, you have mapping. And at the bottom, you have monitoring. That just, it clicked for me. It's like the same satellite provider, the same type of data delivered in a different, as a function of latency and resolution, delivered in a different package. You can charge exponentially different prices for. And once you segregate those use cases, you realize that the same people who will pay you thousands of dollars for an image for a mobilization use case will also bargain you down into the tens of dollars range for an image in a monitoring use case. And so traditionally you think like, I can't give away data for this cheap. It's going to totally undermine my business. I can't just be, it's not a charity. We have to put stuff in space. Like that's expensive. But then it doesn't undermine your use case, because if it's high enough resolution and it's fast enough, no one's going to complain that you're giving away the same stuff on weak latency, because they can't do what they need to do with that type of uncertainty. That was, I think, the important insight. So that's, I didn't even write that much. I didn't even write like a ton about it. I just wrote the basic Venn diagram and like, what are the three definitions?
Yeah, I think you're organizing thoughts that, I hesitate to say potentially not unique thoughts, but I think you're formalizing them in a manner that is easy to consume, and also sometimes it's nice to have someone who can demark those lines to say, hey, this is how I see it, and it's like, well, is that how I see it? Maybe I see it slightly differently, but having someone else demark them allows you to think through the why. Like, why does someone see it in that manner? I see it in this manner. It's a little bit different, but that's okay, because that challenges me to make sure I understand how I see the market, how I see different products, and how I see it all fit together. Because really, you've got a camera in the sky, it's orbiting the planet, it's taking pictures. There's a whole bunch of arbitrary stuff around, like the CCD is only this big, so your swath is only this big. So you've got all these kind of arbitrary measurements that are independent of the products that we're trying to create. So you've got this kind of weird dichotomy between like how we're creating the sensory information and then how we're consuming it. And most businesses go from consumer to like product, but remote sensing goes very much from product to consumer. It says, this is what you get, hope it works. And by the way, if you think of it, any other people that might want this would really like to know. It's interesting.
You said two really important things there. One, that none of that was an original thought, which is totally true. I've never had one in my life. I would love to know what that feels like. And secondly, that some people might look at it, and even if they don't agree, it would help them clarify their thinking. Well, those people are wrong, because it is definitely right. It is unequivocally the correct way to segregate use cases within satellite imagery. And I will probably regret saying that 6 months from now.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anyone's ever disputed that. You're absolutely spot on at all times, Joe.
It's not really an opinion, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's factual.
It's pure fact. 100%.
The other point that you made that I'm curious, because we're going to need your help, like a lot, on this. The product to consumer part of satellite imagery, the sort of like, this is what you get part. I think you're missing a link in that mental model as well, because actually SparkGeo sits in the middle of that. You're the channel partner, and your job is the worst job of all, which is, on the one side, you've got this dogmatic, arrogant satellite imagery provider that is like, you get what you get. And on the other side, you have a well-meaning customer that's like, what the heck is this?
Well, I was going to bring that up, because that's a great subject to talk about, especially around satellite, synthetic aperture radar, which is, it's not just a picture of the ground. It's something quite interesting and a little bit harder to interpret, one might imagine, than a typical image. Which, at least, the great thing about that initial mobilization product is, you look at the ground, it's a picture, I see what's happening, I can react. Is my house there? Is it not there? Has it burned? Has it not burned? Where are the bodies vehicles? All that stuff. It's really there. The product is the picture. But I think when we're thinking about commercial use cases, and I think SAR really falls into this, the product isn't the picture anymore or the response. The product is some kind of derivative. So when you're going into those conversations, so how are you sort of pitching that? Because SAR is one step more complicated than, typical optical imagery.
Yeah, in my role at Umbra, I wind up having a lot of sales conversations, like thousands of sales conversations in the last 18 months. And the vast majority of those people, I tell, you're talking to the wrong people. Like, if you can't explain SAR to me better than I understand it, you're not my customer.
Right.
And what our goal is not to own the entire stack top to bottom and capture all the economics. Our goal is to transform the satellite imagery industry, to unlock the commercial potential of it. And the way that we imagine doing that is by curating the best people in the world at turning synthetic aperture radar into valuable products and services, which includes Spark Geo and includes, really, we call it the first 100. There's only 100 companies on Earth that we want to sell data to right now. And those 100 companies will reach 10,000, 100,000 end users, most of whom will never have even heard the acronym, thank God. And they'll just consume the information that's derived from it in the context they want to consume it, integrated with the other applications they need it integrated with. And that's the work. We're like the first 10%, the next 90% is all that work to contextualize this and turn it into some valuable information. So if I've met with the world's largest mining companies, energy companies, insurance companies, and it's really refreshing, honestly, to not feel like I have to dupe them into like a pilot project or something like that I know is going to fail. I can just be like, what are you trying to accomplish? And the really challenging thing for your business is that when you press them, when you ask why, most of the time the reason is that they read about it in Wired. And that's not a good enough reason. Like, I'm trying to understand the business case. What are you trying to solve? What's the most important thing that you're trying to solve? And then let Spark Geo figure out what's applicable. Like, probably it's not SAR. In some cases it will be, and that'll be awesome. But from our perspective, it'll just be like an uptick in the amount of imagery that Spark Geo is ordering. It's not going to be me having to learn what slime reducing bacteria means in the context of the Permian Basin and like well sites. Like, I can't possibly learn every phenomenology that's visible in synthetic aperture radar. We're going to need domain experts, and it's going to be hard for y'all because even within that giant world of opportunity, you're going to have to pick your bets. And that's how we position it. We don't say we're all things to all people. We say there's the first 100, and we want to be the best possible partner to those first 100. And then once we do that, there's maybe 1,000. My personal thesis is that there will only ever be 1,000 commercial entities that we sell to, but that could represent a multi-billion-dollar end market. And they're going to be channel partners for us. So we call them customers. I like saying customers because I think when people use the term partner, it feels a little skeevy. Like, partner, really? Like, we're paying you. Like, that doesn't feel like a partnership. But the way we think about them is as channel partners who aren't the end consumer of the data, but are facilitating that sale.
Yeah, I do believe that that's one of the more complicated pieces of the puzzle. I've talked to at least one satellite company that told me they didn't want to, like, the response was, I don't want to sell raw logs. They wanted to sell the value-added product. And they said, oh, how are you going to know everything about everything? And it's like, apart from the technology barriers, it seems like a pretty hard sales and marketing gig too. And, they were like, you know what, we want to just own everything about this sensor. And it didn't make any real sense to me. And, I think if you have a broad enough attitude towards geospatial technology and you have a broad enough attitude towards the business community in general, then that notion of trying to sell everything to everything, everything to everybody, is notionally impossible. And so therefore, like, it's just a waste of time, frankly. So I think this notion of, I do think that satellite companies benefit from being able to create a single analytics so they know what their API is like. So they can be like, oh yeah, our API sucks because we cannot do anything with this. And they're encouraged to make it better and better and better. So like, it's like classic eat your own dog food kind of a thing. But beyond that, you simply can't know everything about all the possible permutations of where your data is going to get used. So why should you try and control that? I think it's better to have a series of, like you say, sort of channel partners. This is our big ag partner. They're going to be amazing. And then if you subsequently if you realize that niche is actually, can be carved up into a whole bunch of other smaller things, then yeah, great. Like, build some more partnerships and then just get everyone really comfortable with who's working with who and what's on what. And then instead of sales, you're like you say, you're doing account management, which is it's a different activity, but I think ultimately better. And then one would imagine you're thinking about you're not thinking so much about selling pixels or images, more about sort of adding value and hoping. And then do you imagine that the cost of your imagery will be influenced by the vertical that it's sitting in? So someone in one vertical will be charged something, and someone in a different vertical will be charged something else?
No, not vertical. If you mean like insurance versus forestry.
Yeah,
but segment as in mobilization versus monitoring versus mapping. Yeah, those will have different price points, and they'll be packaged with different characteristics. So for a mobilization customer, it's going to be the most expensive product. It's probably going to bump other people off the schedule, and it's going to be delivered with extremely low latency. For a monitoring person, their stuff's going to get knocked around all over the schedule. But, if we're coming up on the deadline of when we promised it, then we'll make sure that it gets delivered, but it'll cost maybe 1/100th of what the mobilization. And the dirty secret about constellations designed for mobilization, which the most successful and profitable ones are. And it's hard for me to speak freely about the satellite imagery industry anymore. But there's a lot of marketing misdirection about what really drives the economics of these businesses. And the truth is that big committed sales for mobilization use cases from governments is the industry. It is the industry. It's not the majority of the industry. It is the whole kit and caboodle. If you don't have that, you don't have a business. And so the dirty secret of that is that, in effect, you have a very low utilization rate because you need to be unencumbered when the big event happens, and you got to point everything at that thing and wipe the schedule and whatever. So most of your orbits are probably going to be wasted, or they're capturing things that you just sort of slotted on last minute. The big question
is downlink is like downlink costs. So actually capturing imagery has a cost. You can't just arbitrarily capture it unless you have a customer in the most part.
Yeah, that's true. People don't realize. I mean, it makes intuitive sense, but I didn't realize this before. I'm working for a satellite imagery company. Like, it's not like it's sort of like AWS that it extends to space. So there's like cost to backhaul stuff from outer space. Like, it's not free. It's not like, imagine if you had a satellite phone in the wilderness and you needed to make a call on it. Like, you're not expecting that to just be like wrapped into your regular monthly bill. It's like, okay, we're going to use some bandwidth here.
This is going to be an expensive one.
Yeah.
So there is that element of cost. So to your point, keeping availability high is one of the sort of central features of the remote sensing business.
Yeah, and then I think what's going to be really interesting over the next 5 years, which I always say 5 years. I've been doing this for 5 years, so like we're at the point where I said a bunch of interesting stuff is going to happen. and I'm not sure any of it has, but
yeah, I was going to say, like, are we there yet?
yeah, is it really 5 years out? But what a real thing that's happening is there's people like Amazon and their Kuiper constellation, SpaceX and their Starlink constellation, the Space Development Agency in the United States and their SDA, their hybrid architecture transport layer, the LEO constellation that's going to be a relay constellation that there's assets in space now for. There is a turf war happening in low Earth orbit for these relay constellations, crosslink constellations, whatever you want to call them. There's some startups doing really great work. There's a Canadian startup, Kepler, that's doing awesome work in the space, has like over 10 satellites in orbit, super quiet, put their head down, like do good work people. I have a lot of respect for them. But the upshot is that there will be a tremendous amount, just like the cloud providers, just like Microsoft and Amazon and Google are fighting over, just generic cloud compute. They're also squaring up to fight over, instead of AWS, East 2 or whatever, it's going to be like AWS outer space will be the environment. Yeah. And what it means is that the cost of backhaul should start to drop, or at least stay where it is today, while the latency to task and get data back down drops to like minutes, like single-digit minutes. And so now that mobilization use case costs, it's that much more reliable. It's still the anchor use case for these satellite imagery companies, but the cost to get stuff down for mapping and monitoring is also starting to maybe crack a little bit. And in my opinion, a lot of these satellite imagery companies should have a little bit of a kumbaya, like come to Jesus moment, and realize like we got to do a great job on mobilization. And that's going to require serious investment in low latency and high resolution. And the people that can collect the most amount over the tightest area at the highest resolution are going to be the ones that are economically advantaged. But then they have to solve the puzzle, because mapping is you're not going to beat Maxar at mapping. Like you're just not.
No. They're good. They're in a good spot.
Yeah, and they do a great job. And good luck. If you want to fight that fight, have at it. I'm not fighting that fight. So it's just mapping. It's just monitoring and mobilization. If you're focused on mobilization, you have all these empty orbits. Now it just becomes a really fun technical challenge. How do we fill the rest of this schedule? And the thing that I always think about in the back of my mind is like Uber has variable pricing based on demand. And heck, if you're monitoring some farmland up there in Alberta, like have at it. You can have it for like, we'll give it to you at the cost it takes us to capture it and put it down, just because we want to grow the market, like grow the use cases. And there are economies of scale. The bigger the constellation gets, the bigger the volume of that mobilization data, the bigger the commitments you can make to your cloud provider, your ground station provider, the cheaper it is per transaction. Like there are real economies of scale. And so in my opinion, the satellite imagery companies who, instead of, I call it like VC brain, instead of getting VC brain and thinking you can do everything all the time for everybody all at once right now,
yep.
If you actually are disciplined about building a profitable business, it's not going to slow you down in terms of your growth. It's not a real trade-off between profitability and growth. You can grow really fast and be profitable. You can take those profits and that excess money that you've raised, and instead of trying to like run 50 Manhattan project scale R&D efforts at the same time, you can just share that excess, that surplus value with your customers to grow the market that much faster. And how do you do that? You give data away, and you subsidize the cost of monitoring, and you give it a real run, because we've never seen a real monitoring economy. We've never seen it. Everybody knows that intellectually it's coming, or thinks or hopes it's coming, but who's actually creating the prerequisites to that? Like a ton of free training data, openly licensed imagery, transparent pricing, so at least you know what you're going to be paying. You put those three things in place, then it just becomes a cost question of like, does this use case make sense at this cost? And yeah, I think that all it takes is one or two to make the commitment. We're going to like open our archive. We're going to post the pricing on our website. We're going to allow you to sign up and order without ever talking to a human. We're going to have a really nice API so that, you know, you can easily task this and automate it down the line. Like, that's what we're aiming at. And I see some of our competitors and some folks in the optical space who have the same kind of, they're toying with the same idea. Satellogic recently posted pricing on their website, which was a huge moment that will forever go underappreciated. But I thought it was an incredible thing to do. They're the first people to ever do that. I think it's going to put pressure on other folks to do the same. You know, we don't have a pricing page on our website, but I've seen what it will look like as soon as we have a big sample data set to share so we can back it up. But I think it's coming. And then the question will be, can those first 100, can they convert that potential into real lines of business? And that's going to take years. That's not going to happen immediately. So, you know, that's, again, the companies who got way out over their skis and just invested ahead of traction, they're not going to be around to see the promised land. The companies that stayed disciplined and stayed small and focused on the profitable use cases and had that long-term vision to realize they don't have to do it all right now. They can just take it step by step. They're going to be around, and they're going to capture a super small fraction of the economics that they create compared to the folks that are trying to do it all. They have their own analytics team, they have their own services team. Like, I just genuinely, I don't see that model working. If you're going that path, you should probably let go of your space assets because they're just going to drag you down.
Yeah, it's good. I think we're in such an interesting place around the development of conceivably a series of new markets. And, you know, you could tell a story of you know, modernizing space, you know, greater space access, cloud computing, blah, blah, blah. It's provided this notional increase or step change in capabilities. And I don't think the market is caught up with what we could now do. And I think there's a bunch of us geospatial people running around with our sort of hands above our heads, trying to say, look at all the stuff we can do. And right now, the business community hasn't had a good reason to properly engage. And there may be good reasons in the near future for them to properly engage if people are going to get measured on ESG and they are going to get measured on this and we are genuinely, you know, concerned about climate risk. If those things start actually turning into real products, well, they're off to the races. Great, because monitoring becomes real. Until that happens, until the actual business community cares, I think it will remain a bit of a science project, frankly. But and overtly, you know, we started a business in the UK because we feel that market is there and it is emerging, and we wanted to have, you know, wants to be a bit close to it. So we believe it's going to be something. Whether it's going to be quite as big as others expect is a different kettle of fish. And we're definitely at a spot where, because we're a bit smaller, we can be a bit more agile. We can apply our efforts in lots of different locations and sort of bide our time to some extent for the market to become reality or otherwise. But it's such an interesting and it's such an alluring opportunity that it's easy to get excited and to think you're at a place where you're not quite. You know, you can overstretch yourself. You know, you don't want to start spending the money before the checks landed. That's for sure.
Do you remember like 2014, 2015? Orbital Insight and Descartes.
I'm pretty young though.
There's, you know, Series Seed and Series A, and Planet just had raised a big thing. Skybox had recently sold to Google for $500 million. It was suddenly like, I remember,
real.
Yeah, I 2015, I was reading about this stuff and I thought, I missed the boat. Like, that's too bad. That industry already happened, you know?
It's all done. Yeah.
And what's been really helpful for me is, and this is kind of like weirdly rare, but I've met people like you and Robert Cheatham at Azavia and Ian Schuler at Development Seed, and the good folks at Element 84, Dan Pallone and Tracy Pallone. One thing that the discipline of running a bootstrap business, a profitable business, doesn't have to be bootstrap, but a profitable business. One thing about the discipline of that and the work of that is that the people who make it are even-keeled, reasonable. They take a very long-term view. They care about their employees and doing right by their employees. They care about building like a lasting business. And coming up in that environment and then moving into like a venture-backed, high-growth, high-profile startup, it's highlighted for me that I don't think venture capital is bad. I don't think I think the business model of venture capital is quite a bit misaligned with most businesses in terms of their investment horizon and their expectations and their portfolio construction. If one of their companies dies, what's the difference? But if you're the one running it, you're like, that's my livelihood. So, but the sweet spot is actually both, where you take venture capital, because some stuff just takes capital expenditure. There's no two ways about it. You can't bootstrap your way to space. At least I haven't seen anybody do that yet. Or if you do, you put in so much personal capital, like, but you take like a 20, 30, 40-year horizon. You're like, I'm going to commit my life to this. I don't need the win in 5 years or 10 years. I want to make my life about, and for me, that's what I've decided to dedicate my life and career to professionally. Privately, I'm dedicating my life to losing chess games online, but more publicly, I'm dedicating my life to making the world a less mysterious place, making it legible to machines, making it affordable for anybody to know what's going on anywhere. And what really gets me excited and going is not when we like sign a big contract with some big entity. I love that. That's a little dopamine hit. But the thing that, like, when I lay my head down at night, I think about the college student who's doing an experiment on the weekend or going to like the NASA Apps Challenge, and they have data to work with, and they build something new in a weekend that never existed before because they had access to data that historically was only available to like the 5 biggest intelligence agencies in the world. Or I think about the journalist or the nonprofit that's like exposing illicit trade networks by finding dark vessels and tracing them back to their origin. Like, those types of things create a lot more value than is going to show up on the balance sheet. And they're things that are worth dedicating your life to. Like, it is a thing that I hope is never really praised, but just taken for granted. Like, that's how you know you've dedicated your life to something important. Like the people that built the first railways, some of them got really rich, but most of them just laid a bunch of rail track. Yeah. And now Canada and the United States look like that rail track. That's what their legacy is. I'm hoping that those of us working in this industry right now, to make it a true commercial industry, the products that people will consume on a daily basis that are powered by that intelligence, they'll take them for granted. It's like the weather app on your phone. Like, I expect to know if it's going to rain today. They'll expect to know, all of the various applications that are possible to derive from monitoring, not because they know anything about synthetic aperture radar or remote sensing, but because we put like a generation of work into making that infrastructure. So
that also makes me think about open source software in general terms, because it feels kind of similar. It's infrastructure that allows anybody to build something more than they could before, and it's a shared infrastructure. It's a common good, and that the ability for that infrastructure to enable ideas is so powerful. Whatever, do your proprietary thing, own your IP. That's great, especially if you're a venture-backed company. You need to create something you can point at and say, hey, look, this is what we created, this is what you paid for, shareholders. But on the other side of that, having a more sort of an infrastructural layer which can be shared, to your point, sort of creates that notion of increased kind of sort of increased human capability, human capital in a general term, which is sort of more foundational to the technology sector, is more foundational to geography, if you like. I can't imagine what it would have been like trying to run this gig without GDAL. I mean, it would just be ridiculous. And we wouldn't even start. We wouldn't even have been an organization, frankly. But so we're constantly sort of harking back to the amount of benefit that we've accrued from that from that effort.
Yeah, if you're on this call and you're into open source software, and you're interested in like the history of it and the business case behind it, Paul Ramsey's keynote from Phosphor-G North America, I think it was 2019.
Is that the San Diego one?
The San Diego one is hilarious. It's like poignant. And I aspire to create something as succinct and pithy as what he created. It's like a half-hour talk, and it's just as dense and awesome as you could hope for it to be. What I see the parallels between open source software and proprietary satellite imagery, because one of the things that working at Azavia taught me, a competitor to Spark Geo, there are industries where it would be preposterous for like competitors shouldn't like each other and respect each other and talk about each other positively, but we always did. We always had a tremendous amount of respect for what you did, and we're envious in some ways and felt like we had the jump on you in other ways, but never, ever, ever we're sad to lose an opportunity to you, because we knew that people were in good hands. One of the things that I learned from my time there was that we don't live in a zero-sum game. Like if you're part of a movement, everybody eats. If you're successful in changing the behavior of the world writ large, there's room for multiple people. So even in the satellite imagery world, like I give a lot of grief to our competitors and to optical providers and other providers about their, I think, short-sightedness around competing with their own customers and hoarding their data like it's gold when it's really not worth anything unless they give it away, ironically. It's coming from a place of wanting to see this industry succeed, not wanting to make them look bad or something like that. And it's preposterous to me that there's only room for like one optical provider, one SAR provider. Like, it's a gigantic world, like no way. So if that's the case, then I was wrong about this being a worthwhile thing to spend my career doing. Because like if there's only room for one, then like that would be really sad. So anyway, that's part of what we want to cultivate in the next few years is we're going to bring together direct competitors who are consumers of our data and try to get them to share best practices, try to get them to share tooling, try to invest in open source tooling to make working with our data easier. We're going to try to get our competitors in the room with us. We're going to try to invest in open standards, shared open standards to make interoperability better. And it genuinely comes from a place of wanting to see this industry win. I think, I'll be honest, I've been a little bit saddened by the zero-sum thinking that I've encountered in the early going here, but I'm not deterred. Like it's like turn the other cheek kind of thing. Like, it's okay. I get it. You're lashing out, and that's fine. It's a stressful time, but once we get over the hump and it's clear that we're all going to be sustainable businesses, I hope we can come together and accelerate the growth of the industry overall, because just to be a real shame if at this stage we don't cooperate, coordinate, because like you said, there's no GDAL for SAR. I mean, GDAL can open a SICID file, but the only reference for what a SICID file is, which is the format that we put our complex data into, is of like 30 or 40 page volume on the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's website. It's a PDF, and there's actually like four of them. And a SICID isn't even a file type. That's just the standard. The file type is a NITIF, a National Imagery Transmission File. Like, that's not the stuff that I want our customers getting hung up on. Like, I want it to just open.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that there's appetite for that. And if you talk to the employees at these companies, this has been true since the first blog post I ever wrote, where I called Maxar nasty names in a blog post and said they were screwing up. Maxar has been nothing but gracious and open to me from the day that was published, because they're curious. Like, the people that work at these companies, they're not trying to screw anybody over or do anything bad. They want to see the industry be just as successful too. I think sometimes in certain cases, the pressure of the venture capital game, not Maxar, but startups that have raised money and aren't making money, the pressure of that gets to people, and they start seeing the world in terms of win and lose versus win-win.
Yeah, and you know what, the industry teaches people how to think. So you have someone who comes into an industry and they're presented with seemingly zero-sum kind of contractual relationships, and they're taught to think that way. Whereas I think with the influx of new organizations into geospatial, into kind of remote sensing, there's now this influx of new ideas, and there's an opportunity to sort of reteach the industry how things could be. And I think that's a really helpful space for us to be in. Hey, before we finish, I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to get your opinion on what's your sort of favorite crew of sort of brand new geospatial-ish interesting startups, doesn't have to be a startup, but like new young businesses that you're seeing out there that you want to see succeed, but might be facing seemingly insurmountable difficulties.
I mean, my favorites have always been the sneaky domain-specific applications. Those are always my favorite. I'm just thinking of like Tonka is a really cool one in Canada that's focused on wildfires. And that's exactly what I mean. They're focused on wildfires. Describing their mission, like reducing the number of wildfires and reducing the impact of wildfires, very simple to do. And that's usually the crux of a good business, is like, can I explain it to someone after learning about it for an hour and feel confident that I know what they're working on? SAR may or may not play a part in that. I have no idea. Another one that I love, Arturo, is an insurance-focused, property insurance-focused company. Live.io is a great one out of Europe, out of Berlin. They focus on linear infrastructure, monitoring railways, those sorts of things. ISI, someone posted, is a direct competitor of mine, not my favorite, although Shay Strong is the VP of analytics there and is an old friend, and their insurance product that they're building over there is super impressive. Actually, just to touch on that for a second, ISI is unique in that they're pursuing what I call a barbell strategy. At the one end, they're selling flood depth and flood mapping products to insurers and reinsurers, which is a fully finished, amazing product. And at the other end, they're selling satellites. As far as I'm aware, they still don't even have an API where you can go and like order from. You still have to email somebody if you want to buy data in the middle of that barbell from them. And yeah, if you get through the sales process, probably there's some way to order data from them that doesn't involve email, but feasibility, So anyway.
Maybe they should write an API for ordering a satellite. That would be neat. I haven't seen that before.
If they need some help, with that, I know a great company. They have operations in Europe and in Canada, but if you're watching this and you work at ISI, you've probably already tuned out at this point. But
we should put a build a slash command in Slack for ordering satellites.
I need a bat signal that I can just like put in the sky. It's like the Spark Geo logo, and you'll just like appear.
We're gonna work on that. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the application companies. The one exception that I'll note, just because it's recent, there's a new company based in Austin, Texas, SkyFi, that just launched their open beta. And, I've publicly been skeptical of marketplaces for satellite imagery.
I was about to give you a hard time about that, actually, but I'm glad you jumped right in.
And I am skeptical. And I've been open with their leadership team that I'm like, that's not the business I would start. But one thing that they've done is they've shipped. They've shipped product, and they've done it really fast and really consistently, and it's been broken at times. And every time you point out something that's broken, next day or the day after, it's fixed. And there is something to be said for a team that ships. And I know how hard that is to get stuff off the ground. So I do want to shout out SkyFi because I want them to be successful, even though I think marketplaces aren't the best business. I'm totally open to the idea that I'm wrong about that. And I would rather someone buy an image through them from us than buy directly from us, because it's going to be us co-located with a bunch of other options, and it's going to be growing the industry. And so, and they can provide additional customer support. So I'm not against marketplaces. I just don't think historically they've proven to be a good business model, but I've never seen somebody ship that quickly and consistently on that type of a product. And it's not an easy product to make. So that would be my one meta call out, shout out, is SkyFi is doing, in my opinion, the best job I've seen in the early going. It's not as mature, it's not as full featured as other marketplaces, but they've gotten more done in a shorter time frame than I've seen before, and that's usually a good sign. So that would be my last call out.
That's amazing. It does seem like SkyFi has only been, as far as I met those guys in, GeoWinds earlier this year. I'm not even sure.
That was their first conference as a company.
Wow. Feels like they're cheating. What are they doing?
They have a bunch of Eastern European developers who eat screws for breakfast. Yeah, that's what they're doing. They have Krasen, I think his name is, their CTO, I worried that he might accidentally kill me. Not because he intended to, but just because he moved so swiftly and with such strength and intention that if he reached for a glass across the table and my neck was in the way, he might just punch two pieces kind of thing. No, they have focus is what they have. They know what they're building, and they're not doing anything but building it. And that is, that focus is the rarest, the most precious commodity in building stuff. I struggle every day to stay focused on the right things. So I would say that's a shared commonality between all of the companies that I'm impressed by, is they know who they are, they know what they want, and they're going after it very unpretentiously and modestly. And every time you check back in with them, you're like blown away with how much progress they've made. And so, I think the last 5 years have shown us that trying to be all things to all people, no matter how much money you've raised, it's not ever enough. You have to be focused. And I tried to echo that in my last essay. For us, mobilization is what we need to be focused on. If we can do a good job with that, we can branch into monitoring. Doesn't mean we won't do monitoring, but it means that we're not going to pay the attention to it that we're going to pay to mobilization. I would say, talking to you, I remember your focus on going after commercial companies, tech companies. as opposed to just anybody that wanted to build geospatial mapping. It's not that you would turn those opportunities down, but I've always been impressed by your focus as well. So yeah, I think, but there's a ton more. There's 100, like I said. I literally have a list of 100 entities that I'm like, these are the 100 that are going to make this industry work. And every single one of them is just as impressive as the others. So yeah, I could talk your ear off about all those companies, but those are just a few that jump immediately to mind.
Are you going to get to name your own satellite soon? When are we going to see that? And what's it going to be called?
We name all our satellites. We don't share the names.
We don't share the names?
So far, 2001, 02, 03, 04, and 05 launched later this month.
Yep, that's
but
exciting.
They're all named, and
Right.
they all have logos, and they all have slogans.
Oh,
And so it's not my place to reveal. I'm not sure. I should ask if I can tell people the names.
I'd like to know like the names of the lemons. Which is the worst one, and obviously names that you're never going to use again, because boy, that brings back terrible memories.
Well, I can say
kind of stuff.
The second one is named the Dank Knight, and its slogan, I think, is "The Dank Knight Rises." And I'm pretty sure the third one is named "Live, Laugh, Illuminate," and it has like an embroidery logo. So we vote on the names internally. I can't say the name of the next two. I can say that they're siblings because they're launching together.
Yep.
And that they are, yeah, I think that's all I'll say. But once the votes have been tallied, so I know what they're named. I'm gonna see if I can get us to share it on social media, because every single one has a legit logo and slogan.
It could be like Bonnie and Clyde. Be good. Maybe. Anyway.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Maybe not Bonnie and Clyde, but yeah.
Funny. Awesome. Okay. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time, Joe. It's been hugely appreciated. Sorry we couldn't. I know they're not siblings. There's Bonnie and Clyde as well. That's what I said. Like Clyde, as in crush.
Do I have?
Yeah. No, they were like bank robbers.
Yeah. I don't think that's what we want to go for. Bank robbers is definitely not the. But hey, let's keep brainstorming offline.
Yeah. Let's keep it rolling. Let's keep it going. Finger guns. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to call it now because we're just getting stupid comments from the chat. Again, Joe, thanks so much for taking the time to engage with us. Hopefully the live stream worked out, and we'll look forward to seeing more from you and Umbra on the internet, Twitter in particular. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me, and yeah, I look forward to seeing what we can build together down the road. But I'm always a huge fan of yours. So,
you're making us blush. You're making us blush.